Older than most civilizations could even count, it is a testament to the enduring nature of human creativity. Thousands of species had risen, built empires, made alliances, drawn borders across the stars, and written laws that governed everything from trade routes to war protocols. The Galactic Council, a body of 47 species, had been running things for over 6,000 years. They were proud of that. They reminded everyone of that constantly. And then, about 200 years ago, a small blue planet at the far edge of the Milky Way applied for membership. Earth. The humans called themselves Homo sapiens. The council translators had a hard time even pronouncing it. The initial reports from the survey drones had been confusing. The planet was Class M, with a breathable atmosphere, abundant water, and richness in biological diversity. Standard enough. But the dominant species, these humans, was unlike anything the council had catalogued before. They were soft. No natural armor. No claws worth mentioning. No venom. No echolocation. No natural ability to survive in space. They breathed oxygen at a very specific pressure range. They needed water every single day, or they died. They slept, actually lost consciousness for a third of every rotation cycle, and were completely vulnerable during that time. The Council's Biology Committee had submitted a report that was only 4 words long. They should not exist, and yet there they were. When the first Galactic Council ambassador, a Vreth named Counselor Ozan, tall, gray-skinned, with 4 eyes and a patience that had been worn thin over 300 years of diplomacy, arrived at Earth's orbit and made first contact, he expected to find primitives. Cave dwellers, maybe. A species just discovering fire. Instead, he found cities. Billions of them crammed into towering structures of steel and glass. He found roads stretching across continents. He found aircraft filling their skies, ships crossing their oceans, and satellites orbiting their planet in thick rings of metal and communication arrays. He found nuclear reactors, particle accelerators, genetic laboratories, quantum computing centers, and he found weapons. So many weapons. Ozan had transmitted back to the Council immediately. These creatures have been at war with each other for their entire recorded history. They have weapons capable of destroying their own planet multiple times over, and they have not used them. I do not know if this is restraint or something else entirely, but I recommend we proceed carefully. The Council had laughed at him. Not literally, the Vreth did not laugh. But the response had been dismissive. Proceed with standard membership evaluation. They are a pre-warp civilization. They are harmless. Ozan had filed the report. Then he had quietly requested a transfer to a different sector. He did not want to be anywhere near Earth when the Council eventually figured out what it was actually dealing with. That transfer request was the smartest thing Ozan ever did in his 300-year career. The Council did not proceed with caution. They did not proceed carefully at all. The first thing they did was draw the borderlines. Standard procedure. When a new species joined the Council, their home system was assigned a development zone, a protected bubble of space around their planet where no other species could operate without permission. It was meant to give new members time to grow, to adjust, and to learn the rules of the galaxy. The humans had been given a development zone of exactly 1 light-year radius. 1 light-year. Earth's solar system alone stretched nearly 2 light-years from the Sun to the outer Oort cloud. The Council had, in effect, cut Earth's own backyard in half. A human diplomat named Marcus Webb had looked at the map. He had looked at it for a very long time. Then he had looked at the Vreth ambassador who had delivered it. "You do realize," Marcus had said, very quietly, "that you've just drawn a border through our solar system." "Yes," the ambassador had replied. "Standard procedure. And the outer half of our solar system, the part you've assigned to open Council territory, that belongs to us." "It did," the ambassador had said. "Under Council law, unclaimed space adjacent to a development zone is open territory. Your development zone has been established. Therefore, anything outside it is open territory." Marcus had been quiet for a moment. "I see," he had said. He had smiled. Not a warm smile. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile a person displays when they have decided to be patient, when they have decided to wait. When they have decided that the time for a certain kind of response has not yet come, but that it will. Of SYMJHY, he had whispered to himself, in a language the translator hadn't caught. From now on, I will remember this moment. And he had signed the agreement. That was the first mistake the Galactic Council ever made with humanity.
It would not be the last.
The Council had given humanity a stack of documents 3,000 pages long when they were accepted as provisional members. Trade laws, space travel regulations, weapons restrictions, communication protocols, rules about terraforming, rules about contact with pre-warp civilizations, rules about resource extraction, rules about military fleet sizes. 3,000 pages. The Council's intake coordinator, a Belvari named Sela, who had processed 42 new species in her career, had transmitted the documents and then moved on to her next task. New members always took decades to read through the full membership agreement. By the time they understood what they'd agreed to, they were already too embedded in Council systems to push back. Standard procedure. What Sela did not know, what none of the Council knew, was that humanity had already spent 40 years preparing for this moment. 40 years before official first contact, Earth's governments had detected the survey drones. They hadn't announced it publicly.
They hadn't panicked.
A quiet coalition of the world's top scientists, diplomats, lawyers, linguists, military strategists, and historians had gathered in a facility in Geneva, Switzerland. Officially, it was a climate research center. Unofficially, it was called the First Contact Preparation Unit, the FCPU. For 40 years, they had studied every signal they could intercept from Council space. They had reverse-engineered the drone technology that had passed through the solar system. They had built linguistic models. They had analyzed trade patterns between known species. They had studied every scrap of data they could extract from the galaxy's own communication channels, because the Council's encrypted networks weren't as secure as the Council believed. Humanity had been listening for a long time. When the 3,000-page document arrived, a team of 200 lawyers, translators, and strategists had it fully analyzed within 72 hours. Every clause, every subclause, every footnote, every reference to prior Council rulings that shaped how those clauses were interpreted. And they found things. They found that the weapons restriction clause applied only to weapons that had been catalogued by the Council's arms registry. Any weapon system not yet registered, and therefore not yet catalogued, existed in a legal gray zone, technically unrestricted. They found that the fleet size limitation applied to ships classified as military vessels under the Council definition, which required a ship to carry a specific weapons array configuration to qualify. A ship carrying a different weapons configuration was, by Council definition, not a military vessel. Therefore, it is not subject to fleet size limits. They found that the resource extraction rules applied to inhabited systems, and that the Council's definition of inhabited required a permanent population of at least 10,000 registered Council citizens. A system with 9,000 people in it, or 9,900, was technically uninhabited under Council law. They found 17 such gaps in the first week. By the end of the month, they had found over 300. A woman named Dr. Sarah Chin, head of the legal analysis team, a former international law professor who had once successfully argued a case before the World Court that had rewritten maritime law for an entire ocean, had compiled everything into a single document. She had titled it simply, The Atlas. The Atlas was classified at the highest possible level. Only 12 people on Earth had full access to it. But its existence meant something crucial. Humanity had not simply joined the Galactic Council. Humanity had studied the Galactic Council. I had mapped every rule, every loophole, and every assumption the Council made about how new species would behave. And humanity had made a decision. They would obey the rules. Every single rule. To the absolute letter. Not the spirit. Not the intention. The letter. And they would wait. They would build. They would grow. They would expand, carefully, quietly, using every gap in the Council's legal framework that the Atlas had identified. They would develop technology that didn't exist in any Council registry. They would train soldiers who didn't fit any Council definition of a soldier. They would build ships that weren't classified as military vessels because they carried weapon systems the Council didn't even know existed yet. They would be patient because humans, when they chose to be, were extraordinarily patient. And they would wait for the moment when patience was no longer the right response. Marcus Webb had retired by then, old, gray-haired, sitting in a house in Montana, looking out at mountains that had existed longer than most Council civilizations. A young diplomat named Jake Reeves had taken his place. Jake had read the atlas from cover to cover 17 times. He kept a copy of it on his desk. Not on a screen, on actual paper. Printed and bound. Because paper couldn't be hacked, couldn't be remotely deleted, and couldn't be intercepted by a Council surveillance drone. On the cover, in Marcus Webb's own handwriting, was a single line. "We are not what they think we are. Caro, let them keep thinking it." Jake had underlined it. Verith Station was the largest trading hub in the Eastern Spiral Arm, a structure so massive it had its own gravity generators, its own atmosphere systems, and a permanent population of over 8 million beings from 60 different species. It was the center of commerce for that entire region of the galaxy. If you wanted to buy something, sell it, or negotiate anything of importance, you went to Verith Station. Humanity had been given a small section on Level 7, the lowest commercial level, typically assigned to new members and developing species. It was noisy, poorly ventilated by Council standards, and positioned next to a waste processing unit that pumped a faintly unpleasant smell through the corridor at irregular intervals. The Council had done the placement deliberately. Not out of cruelty, simply out of habit. New species went on Level 7. It kept them away from the important business happening on Levels 1 through 4. The human delegation had set up their offices without complaint. They had brought their own air filtration units, compact, efficient devices that cleared the corridor smell within hours. They had brought their food, their furniture, their communication arrays, and they had started doing business. Within 8 months, the human section on Level 7 had become the busiest area on the entire station. This was not because humans were offering the most exotic goods. Not because they had the most advanced technology on display, they were careful about that. It was because of how they did business. Humans listened. Every other species on Verith Station negotiated in the standard Council way: arrive with your price, state your terms, argue until a midpoint is reached, and conclude. It was efficient. It was predictable. It worked. Humans arrived and asked questions. They asked what the other party actually needed. They asked about the problems behind the problem. They learned the names of the other party's children, their home worlds, and what they missed about being home. They remembered everything. They followed up. They sent small gifts, nothing expensive, just thoughtful. A food item from Earth. A handwritten note. A piece of music. Being started coming to the human section not just for trade but to talk. And in talking, deals got made. Alliances got formed. Information got shared. Within 2 years, the humans had trade agreements with 19 species, more than any new member in Council history had achieved in their first decade. The Council noticed. A senior Council Trade Commissioner, a Melvari named Torek, wide-bodied, slow-moving, with a reputation for being immovable in negotiations, had come down to Level 7 personally. He had looked at the crowds around the human section. He had watched Jake Reeves shake hands, the human greeting gesture that most species found strange, with a Grenthi merchant 3 times Jake's size. Torek had pulled Jake aside. "You are making the other Level 7 members uncomfortable," Torek had said. "Your commercial activity is exceeding the parameters appropriate for your development tier." Jake had looked at him calmly. "Is there a rule that says it shouldn't?" Torek had paused. "There is an expectation." "I'd like to see the rule," Jake had said. "The specific clause. The document number." Torek had not been able to produce one. But 3 weeks later, a new administrative notice had been circulated, a reinterpretation of an old trade regulation that added a new, commercial density limit to Level 7 sections. It capped the number of daily trade transactions a Level 7 member could conduct. The limit was set at exactly 11% below what the human section had been averaging. Jake had read the notice. He had smiled, that same smile Marcus Webb used to give. Then he had called Dr. Sarachan. Pull up the atlas, he had said. Section 9. Trade regulation loopholes. The next day, the human section had quietly restructured every transaction so that each individual deal was split across multiple registered subagreements, each one technically a separate transaction conducted by a separate registered human trade representative. The total commercial output remained exactly the same. The transaction count per representative stayed exactly within the new limit. When Torek had received the report, he had stared at it for a long time. Then he had called his assistant. These humans, he had said slowly, have them monitored. I want a full report on everything they are doing, everything they have built, and everything they are planning. The report came back 2 weeks later. Torek had read it alone, in his office, door locked. When he emerged, he had gone directly to the senior council chamber and requested an emergency closed session. We have a problem, he had told them. What kind of problem? The council chair, an ancient Vreth named Councillor Merrick, had asked. Torek had placed the report on the table. The kind we created ourselves, he had said, and the kind we do not yet know how to solve. The report was 90 pages long. Torek had asked his best analysts, a team of 12 who had spent their careers studying emerging civilizations, to compile it. He had given them access to every surveillance record, every intercepted communication, every trade log, and every movement record from Vareth Station and beyond. What they found had kept the entire team awake for 3 days straight. The first section was about Earth itself. In the 200 years since joining the Council, humanity had not slowed down. They had accelerated. Their population had grown. Their cities had expanded. But more importantly, their space infrastructure had exploded. They had colonized their moon. Not a research base, a full city, population 1.2 million, completely self-sustaining, with its own manufacturing sector and agricultural domes. They had colonized Mars, 4 cities, combined population 800,000. They had mining operations in their asteroid belt on a scale that the Council had never seen a species achieve at such an early stage in their development. They had stations orbiting Jupiter, a research facility on Europa, a helium-3 extraction operation running on Saturn's upper atmosphere. This activity takes place entirely within their designated development zone. All perfectly legal. The second section was about their ships. The Council's traffic control systems at the edge of human space had logged over 40,000 human vessels in the past 50 years. The vast majority were classified as commercial or civilian, freighters, passenger liners, and research vessels. None of them carried weapon arrays that matched any Council-registered weapon system. Therefore, none of them were legally classified as military vessels. But the analysts had looked closer. The hull compositions were wrong. Standard commercial freighters used a standard alloy, cheap, functional, and easy to manufacture. Human ships used something different. Something the materials analysts couldn't immediately identify. They had sent samples to 3 different labs. All 3 had come back with the same answer: unknown compound. Properties include extreme tensile strength far beyond any commercial requirement, high heat resistance. This is consistent with directed energy weapon impact and suggests that electromagnetic dispersion characteristics indicate active shielding integration. In other words, the ships weren't armored like commercial vessels. They were armored like warships. Every single one of them. The third section was about the humans themselves. The analysts had studied the humans who staffed the Vareth Station section. 42 individuals. They had cross-referenced their backgrounds through every Council database available. Every single one of them had a military background. Not just service, serious combat training. The kind that showed up in how they moved, how they scanned a room when they entered it, and how they positioned themselves in social settings. One of the younger trade representatives, a woman named Lisa Park, who smiled constantly and brought homemade cookies to every meeting, had, according to Earth's own public records, competed in something called the International Military Pentathlon at the highest level and had also served 6 years in something called Special Operations Forces. She sold grain futures and medicinal compounds on level 7 of Vareth Station. And she had the tactical awareness of a seasoned combat officer. They were all like that. Every human diplomat, every human trade representative, every human researcher is stationed anywhere in Council space. All of them had the kind of training that most species reserved for their most elite soldiers. The fourth and final section of the report was the one that had kept Torek staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m. It was titled What We Don't Know. The analysts had been cautious here. They said they were working with incomplete data, that their conclusions were speculative, and that they couldn't verify the numbers. But their best estimate, based on Earth's industrial capacity, their population, their resource extraction rates, and the time elapsed since joining the Council, was this. Humanity had approximately 200,000 ships. Not 40,000. These are not the ones that the Council had logged. 200,000. This is because the Council's traffic monitoring only covered registered transit corridors. It didn't cover what happened inside Earth's development zone. And inside that 1 light-year bubble, the analysts believed humanity had been building, quietly, consistently, for 200 years. The report ended with a single recommendation. We strongly advise against any action that the human government could interpret as a direct threat or act of aggression. We do not yet fully understand what we are dealing with. We need more time. Torek had presented the case to the Council. The Council had listened. Then Councillor Merrick had leaned forward. 200,000 ships, he had said. Based on speculation. Based on analysis, Torek had corrected. Based on incomplete data, Merrick had replied. We have been running this galaxy for 6,000 years. We will not change our policies based on speculation about a species that has been a member for 200 years and has never once threatened us. Torek had tried to argue. Merrick had cut him off. The humans will be reminded of their place, Merrick had said. That is final. And that had been the second mistake. 3 months after Torek's report was quietly buried in the Council's administrative archive, a human research vessel named the Clara Bright was operating in the Keth system, a star system in the Outer Arm, well beyond Earth's development zone but within open Council territory where humans had legal access. The Clara Bright was studying a phenomenon called a gravitational resonance anomaly, a natural event that occurred when two stellar bodies of specific masses passed within a certain distance of each other. It happened rarely. It was scientifically fascinating. The crew of 22 humans had been out there for 6 months, running sensors, collecting data, and publishing papers that the Council's science community had, surprisingly, found impressive. The Keth system was also, according to a trade agreement signed 90 years earlier, within the territorial claim of the Darvath Empire, one of the most powerful members of the Galactic Council. The Darvath was a militaristic species. Large and heavily armored naturally, with a reputation for direct action and a low tolerance for what they called territorial ambiguity. A Darvath patrol cruiser, the Veth Kara, carrying a crew of 800 and weapons capable of destroying a small moon, had arrived at the Keth system and sent a single message to the Clara Bright. You are in Darvath territory.
Leave. Now.
The captain of the Clara Bright, a woman named Dr. Rachel Torres, an astrophysicist with 14 years in Earth's deep space research program and, as her file noted, 8 years of prior service in something called the United States Navy, had responded calmly. With respect, this system is classified as Open Council territory under Article 7 of the Outer Arm Access Agreement. We have a registered research permit. I'm happy to share our documentation. The Darvath captain had not responded to the documentation offer. He had powered up his weapons array. Rachel had watched her sensor readings. She had not panicked. She had not raised her voice. She had turned to her communications officer, a young man named David Park, Lisa's younger brother, and said, very calmly, "Send the signal." Not a distress signal. Not a call for help. The signal. The one that every human vessel in deep space carried the codes for. The one that had never, in 200 years of space travel, ever been sent. 3 hours later, a Council trade frigate passing through a nearby transit corridor had picked up something strange on its long-range sensors. Not 1 ship, not 10 ships. 47 human vessels had dropped out of faster-than-light travel simultaneously, forming a perimeter around the Keth system.
They were not small ships.
They were not classified as military vessels. None of them carried Council-registered weapons arrays. Therefore, by Council definition, they were not warships. But they were large. And they were fast. And every one of them had hull composites that matched the unknown compound from Torik's report. The Darvath captain had stared at his screens. 47 ships had appeared in less than 3 hours, in a system that was nowhere near any known human base, which meant these ships had been close, which meant humans operated deep space vessels far beyond their development zone, far beyond any registered transit corridor, in numbers and at distances that the Council had no idea about. A new message had come from Clara Bright. Rachel's voice had been completely steady. "Captain, I want to be very clear about something. We did not come here to fight. We came here to study stars. We will leave when our permit expires, not before. If you fire on this vessel, I want you to understand something important." She had paused. "We have been patient. For 200 years, we have been very, very patient. We have followed every rule. We have absorbed every insult. We have watched you redraw our borders, cap our trade, and treat us like primitives. And we have said nothing, because we chose to say nothing." Another pause. "I am giving you one chance to power down your weapons and leave this system. One chance. Not because I'm afraid of you, but because I'm genuinely hoping, that it doesn't have to be this way." The Darvath captain had powered down his weapons. He had left the system. He had filed a report with the Council that was so alarming that Torik had read it in the middle of the night and immediately tried, and failed, to get Councillor Merrick on the line. But the damage was already done, because word of the Keth incident had spread, not officially, not through Council channels, through the informal networks, the traders, the merchants, the station workers, and the species on Level 7 of Vareth Station who had been selling grain futures to Lisa Park for years and had always thought there was something about her that was quietly, unmistakably dangerous. The word spread. The humans sent a signal. And 47 ships appeared. Where did they come from? How many more are there? Of SYMJHY. Someone had whispered, in a language not their own, the phrase they'd heard humans use. "From now on, I will remember this." The Council summoned Jake Reeves. Not requested. Not invited. Summoned. An official legal notice, delivered to the human diplomatic mission on Vareth Station, requiring the senior human ambassador to appear before the full Galactic Council within 15 standard days. Jake had read the notice. Then he had called his assistant, a sharp, quiet woman named Maya Ortiz, who had a law degree, a military intelligence background, and the ability to go completely still when she was thinking, in a way that made most people in the room unconsciously nervous. "They're scared," Maya had said. "Yes," Jake had agreed. "Good scare or bad scare?" Jake had thought about it. Cornered scared, which is the most dangerous kind. He had gone anyway. The council chamber was enormous, a circular hall with tiered seating for all 47 member species, a domed ceiling displaying a live star map of the galaxy, and an acoustic system designed so that every word spoken in the center could be heard perfectly by every being in the room. Jake had walked to the center alone. No legal team. No assistants. No advisors. Just him, in a plain dark suit, with a small flag pin of Earth on his lapel. Counselor Merrick had looked down at him from the elevated central seat. Merrick was ancient, over 400 years old, gray-skinned, slow-moving but sharp-eyed. He had handled crises involving species that could crack planets. He had negotiated the end of 2 galactic wars. He had never dealt with anything like Jake Reeves. Ambassador Reeves. Merrick had begun. The Council has serious concerns regarding the incident in the Keth system. Specifically, the unauthorized military mobilization of human vessels in Council territory. With respect, Counselor, Jake had said, there was no military mobilization. The vessels in question were civilian ships responding to a distress-adjacent communication from one of our research vessels operating under a valid permit. Those ships were not registered in any transit corridor. There is no rule requiring civilian vessels to register in transit corridors, Jake said. Article 12 of the membership agreement requires registration only for commercial cargo vessels exceeding a mass threshold of 50 kilotons. The vessels in question were personal class. Below threshold. Silence. Merrick had tried a different angle. Those vessels' hull compositions suggest military-grade construction. The Atlas. Jake had stopped himself. Our engineering specifications exceed Council's standard commercial-grade materials because our commercial vessels operate in deep space environments for extended periods. We build to last. There is no rule specifying what materials a civilian vessel must or must not use. More silence. Ambassador Reeves. Merrick had leaned forward. I will be direct. The Council is concerned that humanity has been developing military capabilities far beyond what is appropriate for your membership tier, in deliberate violation of the spirit of the membership agreement. Jake had been quiet for a moment. By the end of that day, beings across 6 star systems had heard his words through the station's informal networks. Counselor Merrick, I have enormous respect for this institution and for the 6,000 years of work it represents. But I want to make something obvious. His voice had been absolutely calm. Not aggressive. Not threatening. Just clear. Humanity has followed every rule in our membership agreement. Every single one. We have not violated one clause, one subclause, or one footnote. We have been patient. We have been respectful. We have absorbed restrictions that were applied to us selectively and unfairly. We have watched our solar system border become redrawn. We have watched our trade activity become capped. We have watched our people become treated as primitives on every station in Council space. And we have said nothing. We have smiled and done business and made friends and kept our heads down. He had paused. But I want you to understand something, Counselor. Our patience is not weakness. It never was. We chose to be patient because we believed in what this Council is supposed to stand for. We still believe in it. But belief has limits. And those limits, he had looked up at the full chamber at 47 species watching him, are not unlimited. Are you threatening the Council? Merrick had asked quietly. No, Jake had said. I'm warning it. There's a difference. A threat is something you make when you're afraid. A warning is something you provide when you're hoping the other person is smart enough to change course before something irreversible happens. He had straightened his jacket. I would like to officially ask the Council to look over the borderlines of Earth's development area, the rules on how much commercial activity can happen in human trade, and the agreements between the Darvith Empire and Council land that conflict with current human research permits. I'd like that review completed within 60 days. He had turned and walked out. The chamber had been completely silent. In the back row, a Grenthi delegate, one of the species that had been trading with humans from the beginning, one of the 19 that had a full trade agreement with Earth, had leaned over to the delegate beside him. I have known these humans for 40 years, he had whispered. I have eaten at their tables. I have seen their homes. I have met their families. And, the other delegates had asked. And I have always suspected, the Grenthi had said, very quietly, that we have seen perhaps 10% of what they actually are. He had watched Jake Reeves walk out of the chamber. I think I was being generous, he had said. Caro, I think it was more like 5. The Council did not complete the review in 60 days. They didn't even start it. What they did instead was hold closed-door sessions, 43 of them in 60 days, which was a record, where they argued, debated, stalled, and ultimately decided to do nothing. Marek's faction feared that responding to Jake's request would signal weakness and capitulation to pressure from a junior member. The opposing faction, led by Torek, who had been losing sleep for 3 years over humanity and had the tired eyes to show for it, argued that inaction was exactly the kind of thing that turned a manageable situation into an unmanageable one. Torek lost. On the 61st day, Jake Reeves received a formal response from the Council. After full review, the Council finds no basis for modification of existing agreements or boundary designations at this time. The Council reaffirms its confidence in the current framework. Jake had read it once, folded it, put it in his desk drawer. Then he had picked up a very old-fashioned device, a telephone handset connected to a scrambled, quantum-encrypted line, and made a call to Earth. It's done, he had said to the person on the other end. Which part? A woman asked. Dr. Sarah Chun, now in her 70s, is still running the legal strategy team from a building in Geneva that officially doesn't exist. All of it, Jake had said. They're not going to move. A long pause. Then we move, Sarah had said. What followed, over the next 18 months, was the most carefully orchestrated sequence of events in human history. It didn't look like a sequence. It looked like a series of unrelated things happening at the same time in different parts of the galaxy. A human engineering consortium announced a new faster-than-light drive design and submitted it for Council technical review, standard procedure for new propulsion technology. The review process took at least 2 years. In the meantime, the technology was technically unregistered. And therefore, under Council law, ships using it were operating under no specific regulatory framework until the review was complete. 3,000 human ships quietly switched to the new drive configuration. A human pharmaceutical company submitted a new compound for Council medical registry review, also a 2-year process. While the compound was in review, it was unclassified. Under Council law, unclassified medical compounds could be traded without a commercial license because they weren't yet considered commercial goods. Human pharmaceutical operations expanded into 47 new systems overnight. A human diplomatic team quietly approached 6 of the smaller Council species that had been, for various historical reasons, unhappy with their own treatment by the major powers, and offered them something extraordinary. Not weapons. Not a military alliance. Not threats. Trade agreements that included technology transfers. Medical technology. Agricultural technology. Construction technology. Clean energy systems. All of it legal. All of it within the existing framework. Within 6 months, 6 species that had previously voted reliably with Marek's faction were voting differently. Torek had noticed all of it. He had put it together in a new report, even longer than the first one. He had called it the architecture. Because that was what it was. Humanity had been building an architecture. Not just ships, not just trade networks, not just legal strategies. An entire integrated structure, each piece connecting to every other piece, all of it constructed quietly, patiently, over 200 years, like a building being assembled in the dark. And now, piece by piece, the lights were beginning to come on. Torek had presented the architecture to Marek privately. Marek had read it. For the first time in 400 years of diplomacy, Councillor Marek had been genuinely uncertain what to do. How long had they been planning this? He had asked. Torek had given him the only honest answer he had. I don't know, he had said. But I think longer than the Council has existed. While the Council debated, the Darvith Empire decided to act. The Darvith had always been direct. It was a cultural value. They considered prolonged negotiation to be a sign of weakness, a waste of time better spent on decisive action. They had built their empire on that principle, and it had worked for them for 3,000 years. The Darvith High Commander, a massive being named Vrath, covered in natural black armor plating, standing 2.5 meters tall, had watched the Keth incident, watched Jake's testimony, watched the 60 days pass with no Council action, and arrived at a conclusion. The Council was afraid of the humans. That was why nothing was being done. But the Darvith was not afraid. They had the largest single-species fleet in the galaxy, 400 combat vessels, every one of them purpose-built for war, carrying weapon systems that had ended civilizations. They had not won their empire through patience. They had won it through force, and force was something they understood absolutely. Vrath had decided that a demonstration was needed. Not a war, not yet. A demonstration. Something that would show the humans, the Council, and every other species in the galaxy what happened when you pushed against the Darvith Empire. He had picked a target carefully. There was a human mining operation in the Helith asteroid field, technically open Council territory, legally operating under a valid extraction permit. It was automated, mostly, a series of processing stations with a small permanent crew of about 40 humans maintaining the equipment. 40 humans. No defense systems registered. Remote location. Vrath had sent 3 warships. Not to destroy the operation. He wasn't interested in starting a war over a mining station. Just to shut it down. To board it. To physically remove the humans and their equipment and make clear that this particular stretch of space now belonged to the Darvith Empire, legal permits or not. He had sent the order on a Tuesday morning. The 3 warships had arrived at the Helith field 4 hours later. They had found the mining station. Automated systems are running. Processing equipment operating. a small crew module attached to the main structure. They had also found something else. 12 human vessels, already positioned around the station, engines running, not moving, just there, waiting. The Darvith fleet commander, a younger officer named Grek, ambitious, following his orders, had hailed the human vessels. This operation is in violation of Darvitha's territorial claim. Stand down and prepare for boarding. A response had come immediately. Not from the mining station. From the largest of the 12 human vessels, a long, dark ship that Grek's sensors were having trouble reading clearly. The hull composition was doing something to his scanners that he had never encountered before. The voice was male, calm, and with the particular quality of someone who is in complete control of a situation that most people would find extremely stressful. My name is Commander Daniel Hayes, Earth Defense Forces. I want to be clear about something before the conversation goes any further. The extraction permit for this operation is valid. It has been validated by the Council, logged in the Central Registry, and is active for another 14 months. Any interference with this operation constitutes, under Council law, an unlawful seizure of licensed assets. Darvitha's territorial claim supersedes the Council's permit law, Grek had responded. That's actually not what the treaty says, Daniel had replied pleasantly. But we can discuss the treaty later. A pause. I'm going to allow you 30 seconds to reverse course. Thereafter, I'm going to assume you intend to proceed, and I'm going to respond accordingly. Grek had not reversed course. He had launched a warning shot, a low-power pulse from his forward weapons array, aimed at empty space between his ships and the human vessels. Standard intimidation protocol. Every species in the galaxy recognized a warning shot. It had crossed the distance in approximately 2 seconds. It had hit something, not empty space. Something that hadn't been visible on his scanners. There had been a brief flash, a dispersal pattern, and the pulse had simply stopped. Absorbed. Deflected.
Gone.
Grek had stared at his screens. What had it hit? He had switched to his full-spectrum sensor array.
He had seen them then.
Fewer than 12 human ships. 31. The other 19 had been running with full electromagnetic suppression, completely invisible to standard Darvith sensors. They had been there the entire time. And now they were powering up. Not powering up weapons. Just powering up engines. All 31 ships, engines at full power, were aligned, facing his 3 warships. Daniel's voice had come back on the line. 30 seconds is up. What would you like to do? Grek had made the only sensible decision available to him. He had retreated. He had filed his report with Vrath, and Vrath had read it in silence, and then Vrath had done something that no one on his staff had ever seen him do in 30 years of command. He had sat down heavily in his chair. And he had been quiet for a very long time. Invisible ships, he had finally said. Yes, Commander. Grek had confirmed. Undetectable by our sensor arrays. We don't know how many there are in total. We only saw them because they chose to let us see them. They chose to let us see them, Vrath had repeated slowly. Yes, Commander. Another long silence. Because they wanted us to know, Vrath had said. This wasn't a defense. This was a message. He had looked at the report again. How long, he had asked, has humanity been operating vessels with electromagnetic suppression technology? Grek had checked. No record of it in any Council database. Of course not, Vrath had said. He had rubbed his armored face with one massive hand. Of course not, Caro. He had looked at the star map on his wall. 40 years of Darvith expansion, carved out system by system through force and fire. Get me a line to the Council, he had said quietly. And find me everything we have on human military capability. Somewhere on Earth, in a building in Geneva that officially didn't exist, Dr. Sarah Chun received a message. It was from Jake. 2 words. It's time. Sarah had been waiting for those 2 words for 31 years. She had joined the FCPU at 42 as a legal analyst. She was 73 now. Her hair was white, and her hands had a slight tremor that she managed by holding her coffee cup with both hands, a habit her team had noticed but never mentioned, out of respect. She had spent 31 years refining the atlas, adding to it, updating it, and building out the sections that Marcus Webb had only sketched in the beginning. She had trained 3 generations of lawyers, diplomats, and strategists. She watched humanity grow, build, and wait. She had always known this moment was coming. She had just hoped she would still be around to see it. She had called a meeting. 30 people gathered in the main conference room: senior strategists, department heads, the legal team, and communications. The next generation, mostly. People in their 30s and 40s who had spent their careers preparing for this exact moment. Sarah had stood at the head of the table. "We are opening the Atlas," she had said. No one had spoken. Full deployment. All sections: the legal restructuring, the diplomatic realignment, the technology disclosure schedule, the trade network activation, and the fleet transition. Everything on the timeline we planned. A young man at the far end, a legal analyst named Tom Reyes, who Sarah considered one of the best minds she'd ever trained, had raised his hand. "The council will push back hard," he had said. "Yes," Sarah had agreed. "Some species will panic," he had continued. "Some will," she had agreed again. "And the Darvith." "The Darvith," Sarah had said carefully, "are going to have to make a decision about what kind of empire they want to be. We're going to give them every opportunity to make the right one. But we're not going to wait for them forever." She had looked around the room. "For 200 years, we have been the most patient species in this galaxy. We have absorbed insults, restrictions, unfair treatment, and deliberate provocations without retaliating. We have followed every rule to the letter while others bent those rules around us. We have built quietly and grown quietly and waited quietly." She had straightened. "Of SYMJHY, from this moment forward, we stopped being quiet." What followed in the next 90 days was described later by historians of multiple species as the most dramatic diplomatic, technological, and strategic revelation in galactic history since the founding of the Council itself. Day 1. Humanity submitted, simultaneously, the registration documents for 612 previously unregistered ship classes, weapon systems, propulsion technologies, medical technologies, energy systems, and construction methods to the Council's Technical Review Board. The board had a staff of 40. The review process for a single new technology submission averaged 8 months. 612 submissions arrived simultaneously before breakfast. Day 3. Earth's government officially disclosed the existence of the FCPU and the Atlas, not its contents, but its existence. A formal statement explained that humanity had spent two for over 140 years. "We have conducted a comprehensive legal analysis of the Council membership framework and identified structural inequities affecting junior member species across the board." They offered to share the analysis. They offered to share the analysis with all 47 member species, not just the Council. They offered to share the analysis equally with all 47 member species. Published openly, freely available, in every member language. Day 7. 63 previously unregistered human facilities across the galaxy came online simultaneously: research stations, refueling depots, communication relays, and deep space observation posts. All of them legal. All of them are operational. All of them are staffed and running. The Council's navigation authorities suddenly had 63 new objects to map that hadn't existed in their records the day before. Day 14. Humanity made public the full scope of their fleet for the first time. Not 200,000 ships. The analysts had been conservative. 340,000 vessels, spread across the galaxy. In systems that no one had known humans were present. In corridors no one knew humans had traveled. Operating continuously, silently, for over a century. The galaxy went very hushed. The emergency council session was called within hours of the fleet disclosure. Every seat was filled. Every delegate was present in person, not via holographic link, in person, which had not happened in over 100 years. Even species that were technically at cold war with each other had shown up, because the occasion was bigger than their disputes. Jake Reeves walked into the chamber for the second time. He looked the same as before. Same dark suit. Same Earth flag pin. Same calm. But this time, the room felt different. 200 years of careful positioning, the trade agreements, the relationships, the legal architecture, the 6 species that now voted differently, and the 31 other member species who had received humanity's open atlas analysis and were currently reading it with growing expressions of something between shock and recognition. This time, when Jake walked to the center of the chamber, the weight was different. Merrick looked older than he had 60 days ago. Not physically, but in the way a person looks when something they believed absolutely turns out to have been wrong. "Ambassador Reeves," he had said. "Counselor Merrick," Jake had replied. "You have placed the council in a very difficult position." Jake had nodded slowly. "I know. I'm sorry for that. I genuinely am." Merrick had seemed surprised by the apology. "You are sorry?" "I'm sorry that it got to this point," Jake had said. "I apologize for what we did. But I am sorry that the council made choices across 200 years that made all of this possible. Because it didn't have to be this way. We came here wanting to be part of something. We came here in genuine faith. And we were met with assumptions, restrictions, and a kind of casual dismissal that you probably didn't even realize was happening." He had paused. "We are not your enemy. We have never been your enemy. We have 340,000 ships, yes. We have weapons systems you haven't cataloged. We have technology you don't fully understand. And in 200 years, through every insult, every restriction, every unfair treatment, we have not fired a single shot in anger. Not one." The chamber was absolutely silent. "We want a real seat at this table. Not a level 7 seat. Not a junior member seat. A full seat, with full rights, a full vote, and full representation. We want the border of our development zone restored to its proper boundary, our full solar system. We want the commercial density restrictions lifted. We want the bilateral agreements that overlap our research permits renegotiated." He had looked directly at Merrick. "And we want this council to look at the atlas analysis we've published, not for our sake, but for the sake of every junior member species that has been sitting on level 7 of Vareth Station for 100 years wondering why the rules never seem to work in their favor." A long silence. Then Torek, quiet, tired-eyed Torek, who had been trying to warn everyone for 3 years, had spoken. "I second every request," he had said. One by one, delegates had begun to speak. The 6 species that had quietly moved into humanity's trade network. Then there were others, species that had read the atlas analysis and recognized things in it that applied to their own situations, their own histories of quiet mistreatment that they had never had the legal framework to articulate before. Merrick had listened to all of it. For the first time in 400 years, he had been outvoted. The resolution had passed. 41-6. Full council membership for humanity, with all rights, all votes, and all representation. The border was restored. The commercial restrictions were lifted. A formal review of all junior member agreements was initiated, using humanity's atlas analysis as the legal foundation. When the vote count was announced, Jake had stood very still in the center of the chamber. Then, very quietly, he had pressed his palm flat against his chest, over the Earth flag pin on his lapel. He had not smiled the quiet, patient smile. He had smiled the real one, the one that Marcus Webb had never gotten to use. 3 days after the council vote, Jake Reeves received an unexpected visitor. Vrath, Darvith High Commander, 2.5 meters of natural black armor, the most feared military commander in the Eastern Spiral Arm, had arrived at Vareth Station. Alone. No escort, no guards, no fleet in orbit. Just Vrath, walking through the corridors of Level 7, past the Level 7 section that was no longer the noisy, poorly ventilated outpost it used to be, but was now the busiest, most important diplomatic hub on the entire station. He had asked for Jake personally. Jake had gone to meet him in a small conference room, just the 2 of them, plus Maya Ortiz, who stood quietly in the corner in a way that made Vrath very briefly and instinctively reassess her threat level. Vrath had sat down. It was a careful process. He was large, and the human chairs were not built for him. Jake had quietly arranged for a larger chair to be brought in. Vrath had noticed that and said nothing, but something in his posture had shifted very slightly. "I came to understand something," Vrath had said. His translator unit rendered his voice in deep, rumbling tones. "I've been trying to understand it since the Helith Field incident." "What did you want to understand?" Jake had asked. "Why," Vrath had said. You had the capability to destroy my 3 ships at Helith. You had the capability to make the Keth incident into something entirely different. You have had, for years, the capability to come to this council table with force rather than with words. And you chose words. Jake had been quiet for a moment. Would you have respected us more if we'd come with force? Vrath had thought about it seriously. Not a rhetorical pause, but genuine consideration. In the short term, he had said, honestly.
Yes.
Force is something I understand. And in the long term? Vrath had been quiet. In the long term, he had said slowly, I think we would have been at war. And he had paused, as if the next words were difficult. I am no longer certain that would have ended as I once assumed it would. Jake had nodded. That's why, Jake had said simply. We didn't come with force because we didn't want a war. We wanted a seat. We wanted to be treated like what we are, a species with something real to contribute. Not junior members on level 7. Equals. Vrath had looked at him for a long moment. You are a strange species, he had finally said. We've been told, Jake had replied. You're soft. You have no natural armor. You require water every day. You sleep in complete vulnerability for a third of every rotation cycle. Vrath had tilted his massive head. And you are the most dangerous species this galaxy has produced in 6,000 years. Jake had looked at him directly. We survived, he had said quietly. Everything this universe threw at us. Ice ages, pandemics, famines, impacts. Every disaster, natural and self-inflicted, we survived it. It was not because we were the strongest, the fastest, or the most armored. Because we adapted. Because we learned. Because we refused to stop. He had leaned forward slightly. You want to understand us, Commander? That's it. That's the whole thing. We don't know how to stop. When something pushes against us, we don't break. We figure out how to push back. And we have been very patiently figuring out how to push back against this council for 200 years. Vrath had been still for a long time. Then he had done something that Jake would later describe as the most surprising moment of his diplomatic career. The Darvith High Commander had placed both massive hands flat on the table, the Darvith gesture of formal acknowledgement between equals. I would like, Vrath had said, with great deliberateness, to discuss the possibility of a bilateral agreement between the Darvith Empire and Earth. Jake had looked at him for a moment. Then he had smiled. Warm, genuine, the real smile. Maya, he had said without turning around, please bring us some coffee. Already brewing, Maya had said from the corner.